Hello and welcome to Nutrition Unfiltered, a podcast where science meets sass. I am Christy Maloney, registered dietitian and eating disorder specialist. This is a place where we talk nutrition, ask the hard questions, and have some fun along the way. I'm so glad you're here. Hello and welcome back to Nutrition Unfiltered. Today I have the pleasure of having Dylan Carson on as my guest. Dylan, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and your history.
Yeah, so I attended University of Alabama at Birmingham 2016 to 2018 to finish up my bachelor's in exercise science, exercise physiology. I started my master's program in nutrition shortly after. I didn't always know exactly that I wanted to do nutrition. I originally thought that I was going to go like physical therapy, occupational therapy route. That just did not go exactly how I had planned and exactly how I wanted it to. Thankfully, I had mentors at UAB that kind of helped me along the way, specifically my senior year of undergrad. I was able to do an internship with UAB football and a guy named Christian Behrens, who was a really great mentor to me and helped me kind of figure out my path in nutrition. So I started the master's program the year after I graduated, and I haven't really looked back since. So I did a lot of different diverse internships, from the hospital to, again, with UAB football, to eating disorder facilities, to diabetes education. So a lot of different things that kind of, came up whenever I was making the decision about what exactly I wanted to do for a career. I really enjoyed being in the hospital. It was really fast paced, being able to meet with a lot of different people with a lot of different backgrounds that had a lot of different disease states. I think helped a lot with the diversity of my background. I also really enjoyed UAB football a lot. It ended up not being exactly what I wanted to do for a career based on time and the values that I had. And then I ended up enjoying being in the treatment space for eating disorders the most, and just kind of connecting with the people there, being able to follow them for, 6 to 8 weeks at a time, or sometimes longer than that, really getting to know them on a deeper level, connecting with them and finding my purpose in that. So I've been working in the eating disorder treatment space now for a year and a half, starting in residential treatment, also doing PHP IOP, transitioning to the virtual space, doing PHP IOP, and then obviously joining Enhanced Nutrition Associates back in February, and trying to use my background in personal training as well as exercise science and physiology, and some of the internships that I had around athletes to be able to treat or help more diverse background of people than just eating disorders. So it's been a lot of fun so far.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts I have is, one, you're one of the people that enjoy clinical, so that's pretty amazing. Yeah, it's a love it or hate it. And then in terms of like eating disorder treatment, I kind of feel like you don't choose eating disorder treatment life, it chooses you kind of thing. Like you either love it or you hate it, and you love it, which is amazing. So when we're looking at, our conversation today around performance nutrition, sports nutrition, that kind of thing, where do you see like the intersectionality of that? And because those two worlds are very different, like how do you kind of put all that together?
They are very different, but I do think that they overlap. A lot of clients that I work with in the eating disorder treatment space have an athletic background. They're dancers, they're cheerleaders or runners in college or any other type of athlete. And that athletic identity kind of was taken away at some point. Maybe it was a way that they used to cope with different things that were happening in life, and that was taken away. And so now they, are struggling to figure out how to cope with life, which the eating disorder kind of comes in a little bit more. Maybe it developed in college for them, or maybe before then, and their athletic identity kind of played into that. And then once that's taken away again, it's like, well, what do I do now? So treating eating disorders specifically around movement avoidance or compulsive movement, and then working with clients that want to improve performance all comes back to the relationship with food, the relationship with movement, and how they're able to kind of progress through that, starting with building a foundation around movement that is a healthy foundation, and building that foundation around food and a healthy relationship around food, to then being able to increase performance along the way. I really believe that in both scenarios that movement can play a really, really important role in recovery, as well as what we know about exercise and longevity, and muscle mass being a great predictor of longevity as we age. And so helping people figure out exactly what that looks like for them overlaps a lot with performance nutrition as well as with eating disorders. So
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes so much sense. Lots of intersections and overlaps. So when someone is, let's caveat this right, they're in a place of recovery, or someone that's not had an eating disorder, but they're looking to just kind of improve performance via nutrition, what would you say to that? We we hear a lot about macros, we hear a lot about a variety of different things. If you're going to kind of give a bird's eye view of performance nutrition, what would you say?
I would say that every person that I've worked with up to this point is not eating enough. Like every client that I have started working with recently or over time that is interested in performance and improving their performance, whether it's running or in the gym or in a sport or as an athlete, they're not eating enough. And it's the same with how most eating disorders present. There's some sort of underlying disordered eating pattern that begins because we live in a society that's super hyper focused on weight loss. And so it's not necessary all the time to restrict macros for the purpose of performance, because then we end up seeing performance dip whenever we're not having enough carbohydrates before, or sustaining carbohydrates throughout the day, or eating enough protein. I know a lot of ladies that I've worked with have a distorted view of protein, in that it's considered masculine, I think, and they don't want to look masculine, right?
The masculine macro, yes.
Yeah. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I've had clients tell me that they actually don't eat protein for that purpose. They feel like it's going to make them look masculine, or they feel like it's going to make them bulk or something like that. And so they restrict their protein throughout the day. And it's like, well, performance is definitely going to take a hit there, because we're not getting enough of the one macronutrient that is responsible for building muscle. And the same with carbohydrates. I think that social media, or the age of society that we live in currently, has such a distorted view of carbohydrates and weight loss, with glucose monitoring and restrictive diets like intermittent fasting and doing fasted cardio or fasted movement, because that's going to burn fat versus, whatever else that you're trying to accomplish. And so there's a lot of myths, and dispelling those with clients that I meet with that have no energy and want to improve performance, or have hit a plateau with building muscle and want to build more muscle. And it's kind of an easy place to start, with being like, okay, well, you're not having enough protein, you're not having enough carbohydrates. So I think that is the number one thing with most people, is they're just not eating enough throughout the day.
Yeah, that makes so much sense to me. And I want to come back to what you were talking about, like the masculinity of protein, and I don't want to bulk up and build too much muscle. I always kind of like to point out that I hear so much in like the female world, right? Like about toning. I want to tone. That actually is muscle building.
Yeah.
And you need protein for that. It's just very interesting. And yeah, I don't know. That just always comes to mind. If you're going to just kind of talk about macro recommendations, right? And we know, like, again, caveating this by each person is a unique individual that's going to need different things to some level. For the average person that's trying to understand basic, like, rules, if you will, of sports nutrition. How would you describe that, right? Like if we're thinking about needing protein, how would they gauge how much, or how would you gauge how much you would need of carbohydrates, that kind of thing?
So with protein, I think that what we see in research for the purpose of building muscle is that there's a really wide range of where we see that that protein is utilized for muscle building, from anywhere from 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, even up to like a gram per pound for people that are maybe more interested in bodybuilding, which I don't work a ton with people that are interested in that. So my recommendation is normally 1.2 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight, because what we know is that our body does utilize protein, and it's not converted necessarily to fat in excess. So if we're taking in 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, a lot of people think, oh, well, my body's only going to utilize like X amount. And so all this excess protein that I am getting is not actually being used, but it actually is being used. It is being used to build hormones as well. It's being used to build new cells, as well as building muscle, repairing those small fiber muscle tears. And so the amount of protein that you're getting up to, 2 grams per kilogram of body weight is more than likely going to be used in some way to repair or to heal or to build muscle. And so it really comes down to, what do you feel the most comfortable with? For myself, I'm like 80 kilograms or 85 kilograms. So when I'm looking at my day and I'm looking at 2 grams per kilogram of body weight, that's getting close to like 200 grams of protein in a day.
That's hard to
And
achieve.
so, exactly. And for a lot of people, that if we go back to what I was saying initially with like not eating enough throughout the day, if I meet with someone that is getting like 40 grams of protein in a day, which I just met with someone recently over the last few weeks, that when we did the diet recall, they were getting like 40 to 60 grams based on my best estimation, with the goal of wanting to build muscle. So telling them, all right, let's do 200 grams of protein a day, is just really not realistic. Even if their body weight is, higher, maybe you're around 100 kilograms, or maybe you're around 90 kilograms, right? Which then converts to a lot more than just, 200 grams in a day. So starting small with the lower end of that range of 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight is much more reasonable. So for myself, that being a baseline of 100 grams in the day is a lot more achievable to say, okay, my lower limit is on a minimum day, I'm trying to get 100 grams of protein within the day. I know that is my lower threshold, to where I'm still going to be building muscle. I'm still going to be able to, repair muscle and recover. And then on days where it's maybe easier, maybe I am able to have more protein at breakfast. Maybe I am able to have more protein at lunch and at dinner. And I do get closer to the 160 or 180 grams within the day. I also know that my body is utilizing that protein as well to the max. So for a lot of people, starting off and establishing that lower limit as an initial goal, especially if you're not getting, adequate protein within the day, and then increasing that as you're able, can feel a lot more doable. Now with carbohydrates, the recommendation is, from the Academy in Sports Medicine, as well as nutrition and dietetics, is like 1 to 4 grams per kilogram of body weight, depending on the amount of time that you're going to be engaging in movement, as well as the intensity. So if we were to talk about someone that is not an athlete, an endurance athlete, or playing a sport or something like that, someone that just is engaging in, strength training on a daily basis, or they go for a 30-minute to an hour run, that may look like having 1 gram per kilogram of body weight of carbohydrates leading up to the hour of engaging in that. So that may be a couple of packs of oatmeal or a cup of oatmeal. That may be, a few fruit cups within 30 minutes of engaging in, whatever movement that you're deciding to do. Some simple carbohydrates within 30 minutes, or if you have some more complex carbohydrates like oatmeal within the hour leading up to that movement. And then, like you were saying, it's going to be different for each person. Each person, you may have, half of a cup of oatmeal or a pack of oatmeal, and you may feel really, really great, engaging in the movement that you do. And so that may be the perfect amount for you for the movement that you're doing. Or you may be somebody like me who I utilize carbohydrates really quickly. My metabolism seems to work, really fast. And so if I have oatmeal within the hour of going for a longer run, I sometimes need to have a fruit cup as well in my backpack to have in the middle of my run. Or if I'm going to do like a Murph or something that's going to last, around 45 to 55 minutes, then if I have oatmeal within the hour leading up to it, I may need to have also a fruit cup in my backpack as well as water to help sustain, my energy throughout doing that so that I feel good. My legs don't feel too jello-y on the run back or toward the end of my run, and I'm able to finish strong. So to kind of counter that with maybe someone who is doing more endurance training, right? Or a sport that lasts 2 to 3 hours, we're going to go up to the upper limit of that 1 to 4 grams per kilogram of body weight. And if we're doing engaging in some kind of movement that lasts 2 hours, then we would look at 2 to 3 grams. If we're upwards of 4 hours where it's like a sport, like football or something that lasts 3.5 to 4 hours, then we're going to go back to 4 hours prior to it starting and having something like pasta with protein and veggies or something like that 4 to 5 hours leading up to it. And then also something like oatmeal or a granola bar and fruit within the 30-minute to hour window so that we're getting the 4 grams per kilogram of body weight. Because again, using the example that we used for protein, if you're 80 kilograms, 4 and 8 is 32. So 320 grams of carbohydrates is pretty hard to get in one sitting, right? That's a lot of carbs to eat in one sitting. And so dividing that up into like, maybe you're able to get 80 to 120 grams of carbohydrates in pasta 5 hours leading up to the, sporting event. And then you have, a granola bar and some fruit cups, which is another, 60 to 100 grams leading up to the event. And then after the first quarter, after the first half or whatever, you have a little bit more. And then maybe after the third quarter, you have a little bit more. I know working with UAB football, we had a ton of snacks on the sidelines. So from Rice Krispie treats to applesauce to some chocolate to granola bars to Nutri-Grain bars, like all these different things. And, different athletes had their preference that made them feel better because we also had those during practice as well for them. And so they were able to choose fruit or granola bar or the Rice Krispie treats or whatever they felt best having in the middle or before or, toward the end of engaging in that so that they could sustain energy throughout the entire bout of exercise or, performance, whatever you're doing. So it just kind of depends, and exploring that, I recommend exploring that for every single person. Like try having something, an hour before you engage in, movement if you're, just the weekend warrior or the person that's doing it, to try to improve performance for themselves and not necessarily for some kind of endurance, event or sport. Test out different foods, test out different options and try different things and see how it works. Because everybody's metabolism is going to be a little bit different. So.
Yeah, no, all of that makes so much sense. If you're thinking then about, recommendations for post-workout, right? What do you say to that?
So a lot of people feel like or still subscribe, I think, to the misconception of like the post-workout anabolic window of like, I've got to have something right after I engage in this specific, whatever. And so I think we've kind of dispelled that myth of that there's this anabolic window where if you don't eat within 30 minutes or if you don't get protein within an hour, then your muscles are just like breaking down and you'll never be able to recover that. Like it was just a wasted workout. I had a client just in one of my groups earlier in the week that said the same thing, right? Like they had been told that, I have to eat right afterwards. And their question was like, how am I supposed to eat when I'm not hungry, like right after I just finished an intense workout? And so that's completely valid. Like some people just are not super hungry after they just sweated it out for, 60 minutes or an hour and a half. And so my recommendation is usually within the hour of completing some kind of, sporting event or workout or whatever it is. Try to have a very balanced meal with adequate protein, right? Like we talked about earlier, trying to have a serving or serving and a half of protein, 20 to 30 grams, as well as a serving to a serving and a half of carbohydrates, and then fruits and vegetables so that you're able to metabolize those and utilize them the best that you can within the hour after engaging in some kind of movement, because you want to restore the glycogen that you used in the muscle. You want to replenish that. And you also want the protein in the amino acids to begin repairing any, muscle damage that happened from engaging in that movement so that you can build and continue to build muscle.
Yeah. If someone was going to ask you, like, for some examples of post-workout ideas, what would you say to someone who has time for a full meal or for someone who is running back to work after the gym, right? Like, what would those things look like?
Yeah. So for I guess for most people, it's not feasible to have a full meal. So if you're talking about an athlete, it's probably more feasible for them after an event to, a lot of college and even high school athletes have post-workout meals that are provided by their program. And even like kids that are engaging in some kind of sporting event, their parents can just like cook them something right after that. But for most people, maybe they're going and they're doing their workout before work. And so they're trying to grab something or pack something to take with them to work. And so that may look like having a protein shake and having some fruit or a couple of fruit cups and, some kind of like carbohydrate source other than the fruit, which, may be like a granola bar or it may be the Nutri-Grain bar. Those carbohydrates are going to be going right into the muscle. And so I think for a lot of people, they think we've kind of demonized sugar as a society as well. And so it's like, well, I can't have, the sugar in fruit after my workout because that's going to be bad, or I can't have the sugar that may be in a granola bar or a Nutri-Grain bar right after my workout. And so it kind of can look like just compiling different things that you may not normally have on a daily basis, like having a protein shake with a Nutri-Grain bar and 2 fruit cups is probably not something that you're normally going to have just on a random day throughout your day, right? But if you don't have the time to prepare something ahead of time, or if you don't have the time to, run through somewhere and grab a meal, then that is going to work just as great with those macronutrients doing their job. And most protein shakes now have like 30 grams of protein. And so the vitamins and minerals in the fruit are going to do their job as well as the carbohydrates. And then the carbohydrates in the granola bar or something like that is also going to do its job in replenishing the glycogen. So it may not be as balanced as something like eggs and, toast or jelly on the toast or butter on the toast. And so it may not be as balanced as that, but it's still going to do its job. And so not demonizing doing the best that you can and feeling bad or guilt or shame related to doing the best that you can, because the macros are going to do the same exact thing as they would with a more balanced meal. So
I was just going to kind of point that out, coming because I am primarily an eating disorders dietitian. And I have a feeling that sometimes when people hear a Nutri-Grain bar, the immediate response is that's ultra processed. So I love to kind of hear you say from that food neutral perspective, your body's going to take that carb and do with it what your body does with carb. And it actually doesn't super matter. Do you have anything else to say kind of about that concept?
Yeah, I just was talking about this yesterday. I led a group about carbohydrates because I feel like that everyone looks at carbohydrates and they say, well, this carbohydrate is good, but this carbohydrate is bad. Or this sugar is bad, but this carbohydrate is good. And it's like, well, it's all being broken down into the same exact molecule, right? Of glucose that is made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And so it's not like that a carbohydrate that, it comes from fruit is going to be metabolized and utilized any different than a carbohydrate that's metabolized from a Nutri-Grain bar, right? It's all being absorbed in the gut, into the bloodstream, and then hopefully going into the cell so that it can be utilized for energy, or going into the muscle or liver stored as glycogen. So like it's being broken down in the same exact way. As long as we're having a variety of carbohydrates, then it doesn't really matter, especially post-workout, because we are in need of carbohydrates. Our muscles are, thirsting for carbohydrates and water right after a workout. And so it's going straight into the muscle initially to be stored as glycogen and then utilized for energy for recovery. So a lot of the myths about, oh, you have to have this specific thing or you have to have this specific thing after a workout is like, can you explain to me exactly how that works? Can anyone explain to me how a carbohydrate from fruit is metabolized any differently, especially after post-workout, than a carbohydrate from a Rice Krispie treat? Or, if we want to get down to it, you could just eat a tablespoon of sugar and it's going to be metabolized the same way. It's not going to make you feel full or anything like that. And so I wouldn't recommend it, but it's still going to be metabolized the same way and
You know
absorbed.
what?
So
I think that's a great point. And because the tagline of this podcast is where science meets sass, I feel like that perfectly encapsulated sassy science. You're right, And when we think about, carbohydrates being protein sparing, having enough carbs so that the protein you're eating can adequately do its job and not be converted into glucose is huge. It's huge. And I think
yeah,
most people fail to recognize that.
right. Well, most people overemphasize protein in the performance space, right? Oh, I have to have protein before, I have to have protein after. And a lot of people, like your big time influencers, are getting like 200 grams of protein in the day. So they are getting plenty of protein because we do know that our body utilizes it, and it doesn't really, we're not seeing a ton of research that suggests we're excreting it in, different ways, or it's being converted to like fat or something like that. We're seeing that the body is utilizing it up to, 2 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. So there are a lot of influencers that overemphasize protein and then underemphasize carbohydrates. And so I was just watching a video on Instagram, what I eat in a day video, which
Oh boy.
I have a lot of thoughts about, and this guy, was super valid, right? Like he has credentials and everything, but it was, a lot of protein and not a ton of carbohydrates. And so if that works for that person, then that's awesome. But for most of people, I feel like crap when I don't have enough carbohydrates, right? Like if I'm emphasizing protein or overemphasizing it and underemphasizing carbohydrates, I don't feel great. Like I can't run as far as I would like. I can't, lift or bench as much as I would like. And so why would I continue to undereat carbohydrates if the protein is actually not doing its job, getting to do its job, right? If I go into the gym and I'm benching 225 and I eat more carbohydrates and I'm able to, get up to 245 or 255, well, then the protein is actually being able to do its job in that place. Cause what we know about performance and those last couple of reps or being able to go to failure is that's where we see most of muscle building, especially with people that have been doing it for a while. So if we don't have enough energy to be able to get to that point, then the protein is really not being able to do its job. So overemphasizing protein, but not eating an adequate enough of carbohydrates is really, it's kind of canceling itself out, right? So
yeah, I feel like it comes back to the RD battle cry of balance, balance and
yeah,
things,
yeah,
it really, really does. And I mean, that's perfectly highlighted in science as to why, there needs to be a balance. So I know we talked a little bit earlier, we'll kind of end on these last few notes talking about the misconception of, for females that are afraid of like over masculinization, a fear of eating protein, that kind of thing. What would you say your other two top misconceptions about sports or performance nutrition are?
I think we kind of covered it just now. One of them is that there's the overemphasis of protein where people feel like I have to have X amount of protein, but then they kind of forget about carbohydrates, or their meals are like maybe after they engage in movement, they're only having a protein shake. And it's like, well, that's okay. But if we're talking about like optimal nutrition or optimal performance, we really need to have carbohydrates afterward. So we're going to, repair the muscle that was damaged, but we're not restoring the glycogen in that moment. And so if we don't have carbohydrates there, then what are we turning to at that point, right? If we don't have energy, then something else is being broken down, and in a state where we're consuming protein, it's likely that is being converted really quickly into glucose, because we know that happens when we don't have enough carbohydrates. I think the other misconception that I see a lot is that more is better with performance. And that being specifically around like movement and engaging in exercise, is that 2 hours or 3 hours or running, 15 miles in preparation for, a half marathon or a marathon or whatever, doing more is better. And that's just not the case, right? It's just not. I'm preparing for a half marathon right now, and the training plan that I'm following has me running the half marathon the day that I run it, and not up until that point. And so, and only, training 3 to 4 days a week. And I may do that a little bit differently, but I think a lot of people overtrain, and then we get into a position, or we can have a conversation about, well, in overtraining, are we then fueling enough so that we're not beginning to break muscle down at that point? Because most of the time we see muscle building happening the most in the average population between the 45 and hour and 15-minute mark, where people are engaging in movement or strength training. And within that 45 to an hour and 15 minutes, stopping in that range is where we see muscle hypertrophy, and then an opportunity to repair muscle and replenish glycogen, and muscle growth happen from that point. And a lot of people, especially like younger guys, they can probably get away with it being younger. But if we're trying to build this foundation of a healthy relationship with movement and a healthy relationship with food, in the same breath there, then we don't want to create an environment where we're engaging in movement for 2 hours and also not eating enough carbohydrates and overemphasizing protein, or, with females, underemphasizing protein all at the same time, right? All of these, misconceptions happening at the same time, which is really common, is a recipe for disaster, where then we have injury and you're unable to do the movement that you want to do, or we see catabolism of muscle because we're not getting enough protein, or we're not replenishing carbohydrates or getting enough carbohydrates to fund, right, the amount of movement that we're wanting to do. So I would say that those three are probably the most underemphasis of protein within the female population, overemphasis of protein in the male population, and then the over, overtraining with most of people, or not knowing exactly what that looks like. And then in all of those, like every single topic that we've covered, it all comes back to like listening to your body, right? Because it is, relevant to say that we do want to push ourselves, right? We do want to push the envelope a little bit of what our body can accomplish, but we can't do that if we are jumping straight into a training program that is 2 hours, because then we get injured. So then we can't push our body. We can't do that if we're not eating enough carbohydrates, and we can't do that if we're not eating enough protein. So fueling yourself enough for the movement that you will be doing, and then building up to a place where you're able to push your body a little bit more, that prevents injury. And that, is the foundation on which you're able to build lifelong or longevity in movement, which is the goal for everyone, right? Is to be able to do this when you're 40, when you're 50, hopefully when you're 60, so that you can continue, living life with your kids, with your grandkids and everything. So I would say those are probably the 3 top misconceptions and what they mean. So.
Yeah. And as you're talking about, living your life with your kids and grandkids and, whatever's important to you, it's quality of life. It's, it's quality. It's the ability to have mobility and move and do the things you want to. Well, I've enjoyed our conversation. I feel like it was very enlightening, and, I appreciate all your insights and wisdom. Of course, I'm a dietitian, but I don't know this stuff nearly as well as you do. So thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. And I've enjoyed it.
Of course, yeah. I really appreciate you having me on. This is my first podcasting experience, so I'm glad that I was able to share it with you. So thanks again for allowing me the opportunity to come on.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you for joining me today on Nutrition Unfiltered. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share with others that might enjoy it as well. You can follow me on Instagram at eatingdisorder.dietitian. Thanks for getting sassy with me.